Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Cop Talk. I'm Kevin Schroeder, and I'm here with my co-host, Captain Ed Mamet.
Hello, everybody. Great to be on the show again today with our distinguished guest, who Kevin will introduce shortly.
So our guest today on Cop Talk is retired detective Michael O'Keefe. Michael is a retired first-grade detective. For 24 years, he worked in New York's meanest streets, investigating murders and other violent crimes. He's now a professional writer. His first novel, Shot to Pieces, was published in 2016. It's part of a series about fictional detective Patty Durr. The latest Patty Durr story is Burnt to a Crisp, which came out in 2021. And I believe all his books you can get on Amazon. Michael, welcome.
Thanks for having me. It's nice to sit down with you guys.
Great to have you as well. So why don't you tell our audience a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, your background with the police department?
Yeah, I'm a city kid, born and raised in New York. Was born in Queens, on the Queens-Brooklyn border. Misspent my youth straddling that line between Brooklyn and Queens. I went to St. Francis Prep, the high school, where I really tipped to creative writing. It's a very creative environment, St. Francis, and I got to credit them with that. They gave us an ample push and an ample opportunity to explore things like poetry, short stories, plays, and that was my introduction to actually having things published in student publications. So I continued that up through college with the idea that one day I would write a book. But I didn't like school. I shouldn't say that I didn't like it. I was an indifferent student. If I liked what I was studying, like English and history, I did very well. And if I didn't like it, like math and science, I paid no attention at all. Right? So after 5 years of treading water there and still 3 credits shy of an English degree, I came out to the police NYPD in 1986. And my writing, for the most part, got converted to report writing, which, believe it or not, is more creative than most people realize.
Yep.
Particularly the way that I did it. I drove my bosses nuts in the detective bureau because I learned early on in my detective career that if I don't adequately document my investigation, when it goes to trial 2 years later, I'm not going to remember it. So I started writing narrative stories to myself with things like metaphor and similes, and drove the bosses nuts. My first sergeant in the in the 8-3 squad, Gary Leone, said, "Why do I need a dictionary and a thesaurus to go over your DD5s?" I'm like, "Because you do. Because when I didn't write them like this, I looked like an idiot on the stand in cross-examination. So you're either going to have to up your game or transfer me, because I'm not changing."
Good for you.
So it was only after I retired, which was not my choice. My last knee surgery wouldn't heal, and the surgeon gave me the choice to either go up and file for disability or he was putting me in. And you know, in the NYPD, you don't want to let them put you in, because now you're in uniform without a gun and a shield, doing steady day tours on at central booking for a year before they finally kick you out the door with your disability pension. So I had a file, and I was fortunate that I got a good year under my belt, waiting for the pension board to come down and finally put me out. But I was kind of lost at sea. Did this for 24 years, and I really loved my job. Homicide, and there's nothing that beats homicide investigation. So I'm wandering around, and I kept mentioning to my wife ad nauseum, I'm going to write a book. It was almost a threat at that point. And finally, Janet heard enough. She went out, bought me a laptop, threw it at me, and said, "Just write the damn thing." And Shot to Pieces was born 2 years later.
30 years ago, you had an encounter with a drug dealer in Washington Heights that shook the city to its core. And it helped David Dinkins become the former mayor, the ex-mayor, and brought Rudy Giuliani into the fold, who saved the city. And by the way, I just want to make a point. I spent 7 years in narcotics, so I'm very familiar with the operations. I did 5 years of undercover work, and The remainder I did street work. So the story you're going to tell, I can probably relate very well to. But would you tell us about that?
Yeah, I was at the time I was in the old anti-crime units. They don't exist anymore, which is a shame because they were very effective. But basically, we were in plain clothes and unmarked cars, and we were looking to interdict violent crime.
In the 34th precinct.
34th precinct,
Right.
Washington Heights, and a lot of guns. It was a very violent place. A lot of street shootings, a lot of home invasion robberies, narcotics-rich environment. It's pretty much was the hub for all the cocaine on the eastern seaboard was filtering through Washington Heights. I think at the time in 1992 when the shooting took place, you could buy a kilo of cocaine on the street for $17,000, and you didn't even have to get out of your car. You barely had to tap your brakes. That's how much cocaine was coming through there at the time. And obviously, with a product being sold illicitly, with that kind of money at stake, the potential for violence is great. And Washington Heights lived up to its potential with respect to that. But the night in question you were talking about, July 3rd, 1992, we're just out rolling around, spotting corners, seeing what's going on. There's an expression at the time, corners raised up. Basically, people, you could feel the tension from the people on the street, their heads on a swivel, as if something's going on, they're expecting problems. This is a block that an anti-crime cop wants to keep an eye on because there's going to be a shooting. That's where it's going to go on. And I happened to notice a guy standing on a corner, inappropriately dressed. It was like 98 degrees and super humid, and this guy's got a black sport jacket on. And the other thing I noticed about him is his term was raised up. His head is on a swivel. He's looking left. He's looking right. He keeps yanking the lapel of the jacket over the right side of his body at his waistband. And you could see a large bulge there. Wasn't sure what it was, so keeping an eye on it. And we're in traffic on St. Nicholas Avenue heading south when I bring my partner's attention to it. I'm like, listen, drop me off here. I want to keep an eye on him. Circle the block. Let's see what he does. The idea, the unmarked cars were, they really weren't unmarked anymore. I mean, when you spend 8 hours a night jumping out of them and lock up bad guys with guns, the bad guys know the car. Sure. So we were at this point using it to flush criminals in the direction we wanted them to go. So my partners were going to circle the block and come up 162nd Street. And I was going to be standing on the corner, and hopefully the guy would walk right into me, and the three of us would rendezvous, put him on the wall, take the gun out of his waist. And by this time, I had seen a large black revolver sticking out of his waist. So I'm waiting. I'm keeping an eye on him. At the time, I looked nothing like a cop. I had a beautiful head of rock star hair, 6 earrings, goatee, and I dressed down. And then the other key, and I had to learn this as a young plainclothes cop, really doesn't matter what you look like. It's don't make direct eye contact. Because the only guys out on the corner that are making direct eye contact with anyone are the police. So that's the easiest way not to get made. So I did that. And then I heard the alarm come up when they turned on the block from Broadway. Bajando, agua, policía. Except the guy doesn't walk in my direction. He walks the other way. I'm like, ugh. So now I follow him, and I catch up to him just as he's going into the doorway of an apartment building. Big, heavy metal door. And I grab him, and I pulled my shield out from around my neck. And in Spanish, I said, "Policía, no se mueve." And he gave me a forearm shiver in the throat like none I had ever experienced. But I held on. And as he backed into the hallway, the fight was on. We basically went rolling and cascading in from that first little alcove into a second alcove and then into a greater hallway that was this marble line, 50 feet long, 30 feet wide. It looked more like a mausoleum than anything else, which was fitting because first time that I looked down the barrel of his gun when he pulled it out of his waist and pointed at me, I thought I was going to die in there. But the fight was on. I managed to get my radio out, and I'm putting over 1013's officer in distress calls, which, as you know, Kevin and Captain, cops are proud. They don't put 1013 over the air easy.
Right.
We used to call them 1085s. We're proud 13s. I just flat out put out a 13 because I'm in a fight of my life, for my life. About 2 minutes in, though, and I keep putting over a location. I don't know where I am. I don't know the address. So I'm putting over in the building on the corner, and I'm putting over Amsterdam and 162nd Street. That's 2 blocks away. So nobody knows where to look for me. I'm not supposed to be in a building. At one point, the radio gets knocked out of my hand, and we continue to fight. We're on the ground. We're up again. And I know from the 911 call, it was 5 minutes in, of hand-to-hand combat. And if you've ever been in a fight, 5 minutes is an eternity. You're exhausted. I'm bleeding out of my head. Out of my nose got crushed. This guy was big. The best way I could describe him, I remember the first time I saw Gary Sanchez playing for the Yankees, and I saw him come up to bat. I'm like, holy shit. I thought I was seeing a ghost. That's how big this guy was. And for the most part, he kicked my ass. I wasn't winning that fight. But at one point, he breaks up from the ground, and he heads toward the back stairwell. And I catch up to him and grab him by that shitty jacket he's wearing. And I yank on him and spin him, and the gun comes up, and I'm looking right at it, right down the barrel. And I grabbed his wrist and thrust it away. So now we're face to face in the back of that hallway. The problem is he's bloody, he's sweaty, he's strong, and I feel my grip. I'm losing my grip on his hand, on his gun hand. And as I lost the grip on it, I turned a little sideways and pulled my service revolver. And at the point where the gun again was pointed in my face, I reached out and fired once. He briefly lurched and spun to the right. And a second after, there's not even a second. I'll demonstrate it. It's the way that I demonstrated it in the grand jury. When the gun started to come back up around his body, I fired a second time. And at that point, he went down to the ground and dropped the gun, clattered on the stone, I guess it was marble. But the 2 shots was one after another, was that quick, and it was over. So the first thing I did was went and I grabbed his gun, because they used to call it the Brooklyn bounce, but it was as prevalent in Upper Manhattan too. Guns only bounce once, and then they're gone. So I was making sure that gun didn't disappear. So I grabbed it, and it was huge. It was a modified 38. It handled .357 ammo. This one, the loadout turned out to be 38, but it was a big gun. Put that in my waist, and I'm thinking, now I'm on remote control. I got to cuff him. He's a suspect. Yeah, I got to cuff him. I was too weak to get his arm out from underneath his body, so I front cuffed him. So now I still hear the radio in that empty lobby, and it's still pandemonium. My partners are looking for me. Every cop in Manhattan North is looking for me. So I go down and I get the radio, and I put over the same bad location. I'm like, and finally I hear my voice, my partner, Tommy McPartland, scream, "Mike, where the fuck are you?" I'm like, I don't know. I had to take the radio out to the front door and look up at the address. And then I put over the location, 505 West 162. So now I go back. I don't know what to do. He's on the ground. He's bleeding. Evidently I'm a mess, because the first 2 guys that come in the door, Johnny D'Alessandro and Billy Nolan, Sector Charlie that day, run up to me, and now they're like ripping at my clothes. I'm like, what are you doing? Like, where are you shot? Where are you shot? I'm like, no, I'm not shot. That's from the head wound. So now people start now the rest of the responding cops start cascading into the hallway, and they just snatched me up and took me to the hospital. And pretty much of the rest of the day was a blur. But, he ended up expiring from the 2 wounds. And by the end of that night, I remember the detective that originally caught the case, Huey Drain, good old timer up in the 3-4 squad. I check in with him before I'm going to go home at 6 a.m. I'm like, is there anything else you need from me, Huey? He goes, no, kid, I got everything. This is a bunt. Go home and get some sleep. So I went home and I got some sleep. My wife, at the time my fiance, comes over. We're supposed to go to a barbecue out in Seaford that day. But I need to sleep. She's like, all right, I'm going to go shopping. You need anything? I'm like, yeah, you know what I need? I need like a hooded T-shirt, long sleeve T-shirt for anti-crime work. It's getting hot, and I can't be out there with a whole hoodie. I need a lighter garment. Little did I know I was never going to need an anti-crime outfit ever again. Yeah. But later that night, I'm at this party in Seaford, and my wife at the time, she was working in the 13th, and they had a detail called SB10. They basically took reports of crimes and events in the past, and they were the first NYPD cops on the job who were issued radios. They were those great gray brick-looking things, Motorola's, I guess. But it was yours. You had to take care of it. You had to take it with you, off duty, on duty, whatever. So she happened to have that phone in her purse. And it's going off. And it's her partner, Pete West, God rest his soul. And he says to her, why am I on a rooftop in Washington Heights getting shot at for a riot your boyfriend started? And that was my first acknowledgement, for the first time it occurred to me that bunt that Huey Drain was talking about had hit a seam in the carpet and gone into left field. So I end up calling the 3-4 squad, and I get, God rest his soul, Jerry Giorgio on the phone. Sure. He's like, listen, just sit tight. This thing's going to blow over. Everything is everything. It doesn't change the facts of what went down. Just relax. We'll call you if we need you. So I wasn't in much of a mood to party at that point, so we went home. And by the next day, Washington Heights was fully in flame. And by the day after, I'm being called a murderer by the mayor of New York. Interesting place to be. I'm being vilified on every channel on TV, in every single print edition of every newspaper. And it turns out it goes outside of even New York. I get a phone call from a friend. Larry Davis was a detective in the 3-4 squad. He was on vacation in Rome. And he calls me and says, I'm in my hotel room in Rome. I don't know what they're saying because I don't speak Italian. He says, but you're on TV in CNN Rome. I'm like, wow, I'm in deep shit.
Yeah. No.
For better part of 2 months, I was public enemy #1 in New York. I got David Dinkins ran a circus a couple of days later. He had Ruth Messenger and the local congressman who Linares was his name. At the time, he was getting taken advantage of. He was newly elected. So he fell right into Dinkins' script. And pretty much they're calling me, they're asking for calm because they're, in so many words, they're telling everyone who's listening that they're going to railroad the cop. He's going to get it. He's going to get his. So, there's a pretty austere people. I figure if they want to build a frame, they're going to build a sturdy one. So I'm already in my head, I'm thinking about, man, 25 years is a lot of time. And then the last speaker at that rally was my Cardinal O'Connor, who calls for calm, doesn't say a word of defense about me, which is interesting because I'm a good Catholic boy. I was an altar boy for that matter. He's my cardinal. He's the prince of my church. And he has thrown me to the wolves in place of someone who, at this point, we have already found out he's wanted for 2 warrants. He's the prime suspect in 2 homicides. And they're already talking to confidential informants that say this guy never went anywhere without a gun. But Cardinal O'Connor decides that he puts it out there, I'm going to use all of the power and prestige of my position to ensure that there isn't a cover-up. A cover-up? Who the fuck said anything about a cover-up? I'm a lower-class kid from Queens. Nobody's covering shit up for me. Mm-hmm. But because he let Pandora out of the box, she ain't going back in again. So the New York Times jumped all over that and pretty much predicted that even though I'm very, very guilty, that, law enforcement being what it is, as corrupt as it is, they're going to cover it up on my behalf, which, as you all know, is ludicrous. Nobody's covering anything up for a uniformed cop. But that's where it stood for a while until the first inkling that I got that maybe I didn't have to do 25 years in prison was when I went down to be interviewed by the district attorney. And I don't know if he wants me to use his name, so I won't. But the district attorney involved was a very well-respected guy, even by the cops. He had handled the Anthony Dwyer homicide in 1988 before that. And I know the cops from Midtown loved him. So that was a good sign that he was the DA in the first place. But then the other aspect of it is the line of questioning. All of a sudden, everything he's going into, he's trying to build, and it would later come out in the questioning in the grand jury, he's trying to build me as a human being. He wants to know about the churches I attend, sports that I played, that I coached, organizations and charities that I've done work for. I'm like, all right, well, you wouldn't want to know about this if it wasn't going to come out later. If they're looking to ride me out on a rail, these questions aren't going to be asked. And just the nature of the questioning with respect to the event, I realize the mayor still wants my head on a stick, but Robert Morgenthau's elected and maybe he doesn't. So maybe I'm going to get a fair shake here. And ultimately, that's the way that it turned out. Robert Morgenthau himself referred to the investigation into my shooting as the largest, most thorough shooting investigation in the history of the New York County District Attorney's Office, which is, that's quite an investigation. Sure is. Because he did his job and he obeyed his oaths to do the right thing, to do the fair thing. The truth was able to come out, and ultimately I ended up being exonerated.
Mike, as I recall, the funeral was paid for, right?
Yeah, that was the other thing that really bothered me.
The city of New York.
The city paid for it.
A guy who wasn't a citizen was actually an illegal alien. Can I use that term, illegal
Sure,
alien?
why not?
He was an illegal alien, had never paid a dime of taxes, and only sold drugs and hurt people. But he got what I refer to as a royal funeral, sending him back to the Dominican Republic to be buried like a king.
That was on the orders of Dinkins, right?
It was all on Dinkins. It was all him. And he, when the grand jury came back, I think it was early September, but I got the heads up from the investigator in the DA's office. Jury came back. It was unanimous. No true bill. It's justified shooting. We're going to give the police department and the city some time to make preparations before this thing gets announced. I'm like, all right. However, I didn't believe him because until it's announced in public and I actually get a look at that no true bill, I'm still convinced I'm going to be indicted for murder. So that was a tough 2 weeks. But the investigator they sent over to see Dinkins pretty much sat down with him for 2 hours and explained to him the impossibility of my guilt. And the man's reaction was, this is an outrage. The city won't stand for it. You get back in there and you hurt this cop. Those were his words. So when the investigator got back to me and says, listen, you don't have a friend there. he's going to try and do something politically to get back at you for this because he's not happy with the results. I'm like, well, I didn't think so. I mean, he was calling for my head on a stick when I knew I was innocent. So I'm ready for whatever comes down the pike. I wish that had been true. I didn't realize how dirty New York politics were because the man walked a civil rights investigation across St. Andrews Plaza to the U.S. Attorney's Office. And subsequently, my entire anti-crime team were under investigation for the better part of 3 years for alleged civil rights violations because we made too many gun arrests. Their theory being nobody could be that good.